Under the auspices of Jain University and the Lokniti CSDS, we are having this very interesting panel discussion on Indian democracy, looking back, looking forward. And we have three very distinguished panelists to be with us in this discussion. Ram, you will be leading the discussion with us today. How would you look at looking back? What would you say about the working of Indian democracy?
I think any society as large and complex as ours goes through ups and downs. So in some ways we become more democratic. There is more participation by the young. The Dalits, for example, historically suppressed, are more organized, more articulate. Elections are free and fair. But in other ways, perhaps we've stepped back in the functioning of our institutions, in the impartiality of our police, the transparency of our judicial system. So I'll talk a little bit about the areas in which we progressed and the areas in which we might have regressed.
Professor Ashutosh, as a scholar who has done very, very important work on not just Indian politics but the working of political systems, what would you say on the working of Indian democracy if you were to look at our 7 decades of experience?
Yeah, so I will talk about the key ideas that modern democratic theory has and compare India's experience to those theoretical propositions that all of us accept as conventional wisdom by now. And the 7 decades of Indian democracy can be summarized using democratic theory as having a great deal of electoral vibrancy. Elections, as Ram said, free and fair. Electoral vibrancy is not in doubt, but there are lots of liberal deficits between elections where the democracy, Indian democracy hasn't done as well, for example, on freedom of expression, freedom of religious practice, freedom of association, and the courts are extremely important for protecting those freedoms, and the courts, it's debatable whether they've done a very good job.
Suhas, based on what Ram and Ashu have just said about the history and about the theorizing, how would you look at Indian democracy as we go forward?
I would like to situate our current moment in the 90s in a sense, because I thought if you look back, the shift actually starts taking place from the 90s. That's one. Secondly, I would say that there is a fundamental shift that is likely to occur in India's politics in the coming decade, and it depends upon how you look at it. While I am concerned about the inclusiveness of India's democracy in the coming decade, I would also argue that in any democracy, these possibilities are always there, that you go one step forward, come one step backward, and therefore while I would be critical of some elements of what is happening currently, I wouldn't be saying that our democracy is doomed or something of that kind. There are always possibilities, and these possibilities will have to be worked out by the people in the country.
So we are going to, everybody here is looking forward to 90 minutes of very, very intense and very, very interesting discussions on the whole question of where have we progressed in terms of Indian democracy and what seems to be the road ahead for us. And in these 90 minutes, our 3 colleagues who will be discussing this theme with a very, very interesting, a very, very perceptible Bangalore audience, I'm sure will make for a very meaningful discussion on this very, very critical and vital theme.
In the spirit of the panel, which is looking backwards, looking forwards. So looking backwards, Sandeep was kind enough to mention my book, India After Gandhi. And those of you who have read the book will recall that the chapter on the first election of 1952 is called the biggest gamble in history. And that was not my term, that was the term of a Madras editor who thought that giving the vote to a largely illiterate and desperately poor population was a gamble. And that India, a poor, desperately divided and large and complex country, could go in straight away for universal adult franchise, but met with a great deal of skepticism across the world and within India. The RSS did not believe it was possible. The communists did not believe it was possible. Middle class liberals did not believe it was possible. And this kind of skepticism continued. So, they're free and fair, they're widespread participation. One of my favorite statements about the Indian election comes from one of our best election commissioners, J.M. Lingdo, where he said that on election day, Adivasis defy the Maoists' call for a poll boycott and come and vote. Naga villagers defy the boycott call by separatists and come and vote. On election day, all of India is one. I want to just say two things about freedom of expression and the growing threats to writers, thinkers, artists, filmmakers and journalists in our democracy. I should say that there was never a golden age. There were always restrictions to freedom of expression. When historical figures can't be discussed in a clear, critical, dispassionate way, there's something wrong with our democracy. Finally, I want to say a little bit about institutions and their decline. I've talked about Parliament, but I also want to talk about two other institutions which are malfunctioning or underperforming and threaten the health of our democracy. One is the police. They are amoral, they are ruthless, they are violent and they are corrupt. That is the state of our police and our intelligence agencies. And that is a harsh and brutal truth. And it is unworthy of a democracy to have its police and intelligence agencies in this country. If you look at the state of our judiciary, our police, if you look at the dysfunctioning of Parliament, you look at the arbitrary and excessive use of state power, you look at the curbs on freedom of expression, there are serious problems with our democratic functioning. But I want to end on not on a despairing note. It's not just that we are an elections-only democracy. It's not just that the free and fair and regular holding of elections with vigorous participation by the bulk of our citizenry across class and gender and caste lines is a tribute to Indian democracy. There are other ways in which Indian democracy has deepened. And I'm going to give you one last example, which is to do with our entrepreneurial class. Caste, the importance of caste has increased in certain areas such as politics, but is decreased in other areas such as occupation. The link between caste and occupation is no longer as strong as it was. But to sum up my argument, I would say at the level of social practice, the delinking of caste from occupation, the functioning of the electoral system, we are doing quite well. But at the level of public institutions and particularly the functioning of the police and the judiciary, I think there are serious democratic deficits that scholars need to understand and citizens need to address.
My argument will be roughly the same as Ram's, but I'll come to it through democratic theory, what the arguments in democratic theory are and how India looks against those arguments, compared to those arguments. And the best way to sum up the relationship between democratic theory and India is to say that Indian democracy is electorally vibrant, as you heard, but there are serious, very substantial liberal deficits between elections. So the non-electoral and electoral, that distinction has become extremely important. And let's see how democratic theory would look at that. So the minimum requirement of a democracy is contestation and participation. And that idea comes from Schumpeter first and then was developed most systematically by Robert Dahl. Contestation essentially in the theory means that the incumbent should be freely contested rather than manipulating elections. The other political party should freely contest, and participation means that all adults should have the right to vote, and not only the right to vote but the capacity to vote. Then there's a broader requirement which is about liberal freedoms between elections, especially three classical notions of liberal freedoms: right to freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and freedom of association. The third idea that has emerged in the last, well, it emerged in the 50s, but it is very, very elaborately developed now, and that it emerged in the works of Lipset, Seymour Martin Lipset, but Adam Przeworski in the last 10 years has taken it to new heights, which is democracies can be established at low levels of income, but they survive only at high levels of income. Election finance is the single biggest weakness of India's election process, but it's clear that while businesses finance elections, often illegally, they are unable to determine election outcomes. I can give you many examples of and all of us, and Lokniti would give many examples of poorer parties winning elections.
poorer parties winning elections. And second, lack of internal democracy in political parties is the second biggest problem. But please note, democratic theory says nothing about how parties should be organized. To conclude then, India's democratic credentials are not in doubt. The battle is actually for a deeper democracy. Electoral record is unparalleled in human history. Deepening of democracy requires at least three things. We can expand it. A more robust anchoring of liberal freedoms, and all of us have to think about how to do it. It is a very, very difficult issue to handle. Reform of election finance and internal democracy in political parties through either primaries or internal organizational elections.
And I thought, in a sense, what I am going to talk about, not really so much about history or so much about the theoretical frameworks, but about the present moment and how does one make sense of the present moment of India's democracy, where it comes from and where does it go from here. Therefore, I thought that what Ashu Bhai was saying is something very useful in a comparative context, which is also useful in a temporal context as one looks at India's democracy. The trouble with looking at one's present is that we are so much close to that present that we sometimes get carried away by the present and its details. You know, for example, if one is looking at India's present moment of democracy, you will find that responses would range from elation and hope in 2014 to cynicism and skepticism and weariness as far as the opponents of the present government are concerned. So the first question I would try to answer is, how does one then try to analytically frame the possibilities hidden in the present moment, both good and bad possibilities, both risky and welcome possibilities? I would suggest that there are two strategies available to us, and I would be trying to do that as much as possible. One is to slightly distance oneself away from the very present moment, and the second is contextualizing our understanding of the democratic process, both in the temporal sense and in the spatial sense. And that's why I said I am happy to be on this panel, because the colleagues who have spoken earlier have exactly done that. I would suggest that let us not be carried away by just what is happening in the last 2 years. And this is not just to give you some excitement, but that is where I would slightly differ from what Ashu Bhai was probably presenting at the end of his presentation. The present moment, in a sense, is a continuation of the 90s, and therefore if one has to look at what is happening to India's democracy generally and what is likely to happen, one will probably have to situate it from the 90s onwards. Most of us who are students of India's politics know that 90s therefore is a very important moment, not just because of the decline of the Congress, but many of the other issues that emerged in the 1990s, some of which have been already mentioned, such as the democratic upsurge that was talked about by Yogendra Yadav in the 90s and many other things. If one then looks at the 1990s and starts looking forward to the present moment in the time frame and tries to imagine what is likely to happen in the next 10 years or so, I would argue that we are probably currently living in a twilight zone. The twilight zone where the earlier hegemony has practically broken down. Every democratic society would at every moment have certain set of ideas that dominate that society. In the Indian context, the earlier hegemony has probably completely broken down by now, and the new hegemony is still haltingly emerging, and we are trying to find out what this new hegemony would look like, what would it portend, what would it bring for us. To understand that, I would like to present before you 5 areas of deep contestation between this dying hegemony and the emerging hegemony. These 5 constitute contested issues, some of which unfold in electoral politics, some of which unfold in seminar rooms and conference halls, some of which emerge through literary writings and artistic creations, some of which probably emerge in legal juridical understanding of what is happening in India. So number 1, our idea of nation is changing without our knowing it, and please forgive me if I am repeating this, but because we are part of this since the 1990s, it is really difficult to pinpoint a time when it suddenly changed. But I am sure if 10 years down the line we start looking at India's understanding of what is India's nationhood, we would then realize that, oh, things have changed somewhere. Number two, and we can search for this, we can find out through our surveys, for example, we can find out whether this is changing or not really. Number two, the role of the state and development. I will not talk about economy because the discussion of the economy usually gets mired into very convenient binaries of liberalism versus neoliberalism versus non-neoliberal economy, etc. But what is our idea of state and development? The third, from where we go into the realm of the other two speakers and what they have said so far, and perhaps far more serious issues, is we are looking back and looking again carefully at diversity. We are still not saying that let us not be a diverse society, nobody is saying that. And yet at the same time our whole approach to diversity is gradually changing. The fourth area is obviously then religion, which is changing. Understanding of religion is probably changing. Finally, therefore, culture. And culture and our understanding of culture is also probably changing. My submission therefore is that we are living currently in this period of transition where on all these 5 counts, the overall understanding that India had, the average understanding that India had earlier, has been under strain, has been under challenge, or has been under transformation, and probably a new understanding would gradually emerge. We don't know how much that new understanding would succeed in completely negating this earlier understanding. How much it would absorb from that understanding is something that we would have to leave to the future. How do we then finally sum up this scenario? If one is looking somewhat futuristically at it, do we then say that, oh, something very bad is happening and therefore democracy in India is doomed? Do we say that? As I said, I would concur with my colleagues who spoke earlier. I would say that this is a, let's say, I would put it like this, that this is a sub-democratic diversion. This is a diversion. And democracy in India with this twilight zone is probably taking a diversion. We do not know as yet, and we need to find out, looking carefully at the patterns and trends that are emerging, as to what actual route that diversion would take and what ultimate destination that diversion would take us to. Majoritarianism, as I said, is a problem in democracy, but at the same time, in societies which have diversity like India, majoritarianism is bound to emerge one time or the other. India has probably been successful in postponing the emergence of majoritarianism for 6 decades. Now is the time when majoritarianism is likely to emerge, likely to shape, likely to even become legitimate. As democrats, as theorists of democracy, as students of democracy, and as citizens, it's up to us to decide whether to constrict our idea of democracy to this majoritarian idea of democracy, or to fight against majoritarian democracy and to expand the horizon of what democracy means. But that is a large order. That is not something which only scholars and students and academicians can do, because it is about war of positions. And that war of positions might probably unfold when the new hegemony sort of settles in. Let's hope so.
We talk about majoritarianism and democracy. You said that the two things do not coexist or do coexist. Now, for this purpose, I think there is something called Arrow's impossibility. Majoritarianism and democracy cannot be separated. If you talk about separation of them, then we get into that impossibility trap. Therefore, how do you define to get out of the impossibility trap? That's the first one.
I thought that I said at the end that all democracies, particularly democracies which have large diversities in them, social diversities in them, always contain this possibility that one way of understanding democracy that would emerge would be that of majoritarianism. Either that would be through the idea of community rights, which sometimes many of us actually uphold. On the other hand, sometimes it could be some other routes through which that happens. As to this question as to why majoritarianism emerges, I would say that minoritarianism or minorityism probably is one of the weaker causes for majoritarianism to emerge.
A poor party can win elections. I think that's the biggest advantage of a social media. So you said you can't still take a position whether social media is going to stay or is it going to be good or bad. Also you said that people abuse you and they say you are Congressman and all. But if you look at the other side of it, if you look at Aam Aadmi Party in Delhi, I would see social media playing a major role, though they were not very resourceful from monetary perspective. They were able to win majority of the seats.
Social media, just to add to one point about the Aam Aadmi Party, you're right about the Aam Aadmi Party, but go back to the larger point that Ashu made. The Aam Aadmi Party is only a new and special case using social media of a poorer party defeating a richer party. But there have been many cases in the past. Think of NTR and how he won the Andhra Pradesh state election in the 1980s from nowhere with one van and one mic. Right? If you look at the TMC defeating the left front in 2011, if you look at the Janata Party defeating the Congress Party in 1977, that's what's interesting about Indian democracy. I mean, many other examples of poorer parties theoretically having a weaker chance but finding ways of winning. Obviously, Aam Aadmi Party is the last example.
About the decay of institutions Ram talked about, particularly the police and the judiciary, and that we have been observing particularly democratic institutions are decaying. The question, I would like to know why is this happening?
Why corruption has not gone down? I don't think I can address why police, perhaps Ram has some good ideas about this, why police as an institution has declined so much, why judiciary as an institution has declined so much. But as far as the generic properties of corruption declining, corruption increasing are concerned, we know something. And that is that high growth, very high growth is often accompanied by rising corruption. And here is the nature of the problem. If an economy, this is not an argument against growth incidentally, there's simply some collaterals or negative externalities, morally speaking, ethically speaking, negative externalities of high growth.
It has been a nice session which we had just now when we heard Dr. Ramchandra Guha and many other expert speakers in the panel. It has been nice experience in the past and also in the present. A nice intellectual evening which we had, and I thank the Jain University management for considering this kind of events.
It's like very new area for me because I come from a sociology background, and I would like to thank Jain University especially for bringing this new topic on democracy and looking back and forward on this topic.
I'm going to be participating in the summer school organized by Lokniti and the Jain University. I really enjoyed this panel discussion. I've been a big follower of the works of Professor Ashutosh Varshney as well as Professor Ram Guha, and it was such a delight to hear them both talk, and it was followed by Professor Suhas Palshikar, and I am really thankful to both Lokniti and Jain University for organizing this and for giving us this opportunity.